So the first part of this is going to be me talking, and then after that we'll physically do stuff by exploring the following scenario. What if you were going to participate in a duel 24 hours from now, but your opponent had chosen broadswords as the weapon that you had to use, and you'd never picked up a broadsword before? You're a longsworder or a rapier or a small sword person. What would you have to learn about broadswords in order to possibly survive? I'm using the term, oh, these are not prices in dollars. These are weights in grams. Because the subject of the talk is going to be weight and how that plays into how you use these weapons. So I'm using the term broadsword here in its original sense to mean a single-handed sword with significant hand protection from approximately the 16th century onwards, that in contrast to rapiers and small swords has a broad blade, hence the name, that's beefy enough to work well in the cut as well as in blocking attacks from heavier weapons. So it includes the basket-hilted English broadsword used, or backsword, used by George Silver circa 1600. The Scottish basket-hilted broadsword, of which this is an approximation. It's similar, but the blade is symmetrical and it's double-edged, and so it tends to be shorter. That's kind of the weapon you would associate with Thomas Page, circa 1750, and then the so-called heavy sabers that were used in military as opposed to civilian dueling contexts in the Napoleonic Wars and right up through the 19th century. So got some illustrations. The first one is from 1799, so just before the Napoleonic Wars. And it demonstrates the handoff of sword fighting techniques. So the Scottish guy, there's a big blow up of it here. The Scottish guy is wielding a straight bladed basket hilted sword. So he's got one of these. It looks like a classic Highland broadsword. And he's instructing a soldier in a military uniform who is using a curved weapon. Okay, so that's a classic saber. And so we're directly seeing here the transfer of sword fighting knowledge from the older system to the new weapons that are becoming standard in the British military in the era of the Napoleonic Wars. So Matt Easton has put up some great videos supplying context as to why military men continued to favor the broadsword long after it had gone out of fashion in the civilian world. But you can get a visceral sense of it by looking at the second illustration on the handout, but it's just this, which seems to come from the mid to late 1800s. So the combined weight of the rifle and the bayonet here is something like 10 pounds. And as you can see from the body language of the guy on the right, he's making a fully committed thrust. He's not just goofing around. So the guy on the left is probably happy that his broadsword is beefy and stiff enough to divert that thrust. For another example, have a look at the third illustration. This is a painting done in 1894 by an actual military veteran who saw combat, depicting drummer James Roddick of the 92nd Gordon Highlanders. He's defending a wounded comrade in Kandahar in 1880. Roddick is armed with a basket-hilted broadsword that looks indistinguishable from what would have been used 300 years earlier by the likes of George Silver. So 5 years after this painting was made, Alfred Hutton produced a document called Defense Against an Uncivilized Enemy, pointing out that European fencing school techniques and weapons were of little use in encounters with people like this guy in Kandahar, and recommending that people study George Silver instead. a mere 15 years after that, World War I broke out. And we tend to think of that as the end of swords in war. But in the Russian Civil War in the early 1920s, so just over 100 years ago, broadswords in the form of Cossack sabers were still in serious use. And I recently learned that mounted Cossack units used them against Germans as late as 1943. So the point being that among actual war fighters, broadswords continued to be used over an incredibly long span of time compared to other HEMA systems. Silver was active around 1600, but he's obviously describing techniques that were old when he wrote them down. So broadswords were relevant and underwent very little change across something like 400 years. They also covered a large geographical range, so they're not just a European thing. Similar weapons of similar weight were developed and used for a long time in the Islamic world, India, and the Philippines. One of my basic principles when thinking about HEMA is to assume that the people who did this stuff were at least as smart as we are, and obviously they had more at stake. So there must have been a reason for the widespread adoption and the stubborn persistence of broadswords among warfighters. Apparently these things just work. So now I'm going to get into the topic of weight. Circa the Napoleonic Wars, armies had both heavy and light cavalry units. When you hear somebody use the term heavy cavalry saber, they're not saying that the saber is heavy. They're saying that this is the saber that was issued to the heavy cavalry. So the term is a little deceptive, and I think it adds to the perception that these things are crazy heavy. The last couple of years at SoCal Sword Fight, there's been a saber tournament, which is unusual in that the organizers actually provide the weapon simulators that all competitors must use. Why are they doing that for a saber tournament when longsword and rapier competitors are expected to just bring their own swords? I think the answer is that the term saber has come to mean a lot of different things. And so people have a wide range of notions as to what is the proper weight. Olympic fencing sabers have a maximum weight of 500 grams, but modern competition sabers weigh less than half that. That style grew out of the Redelian system of the mid to late 19th century, which used so-called dueling sabers or gymnasium sabers that weighed more like 600 to 650 grams. This is 605. By contrast, the swords used in the SoCal Sword Fight tournament are Black Fencer 1796 sabers, which according to their website are 820 grams, although this one weighs in at 730. That is a sort of correct historical weight, although it's a little on the light side, as we'll see. To a large extent, the weight of a sword, especially if it's a one-handed sword, drives the way in which it's used. And so if you have a tournament in which some people are showing up with 200-gram FIE sabers and others are using ones that weigh 5 or 6 times that much, you're going to see a clash of styles and expectations. The organizers of Combat Con simply ran completely different tournaments for light and heavy saber, with the dividing line being something like 730 grams. So this would be right on the dividing line in their classification between light and heavy. If you don't draw that line somewhere, competitors will gravitate towards lighter and lighter weapons. They're going to stop practicing and forget about the techniques that actually work with heavier weapons, which is how you end up with Olympic saber fencing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just not my cup of tea. So this term heavy cavalry saber piqued my interest because I've noticed a perception among some non-broadsword doing HEMAists that broadswords are heavy and unwieldy to the point where it's not a welcoming style for new users. Some advocates of more recent styles will talk about older systems in a way that verges on being kind of derogatory. You'll hear them talking about the precision of lighter weapons and the exquisite sophistication and efficiency of their scientific techniques, in contrast, I guess, to the clunky, unwieldy steel clubs used by the knuckle-dragging primitives of olden days. There is an element of class prejudice at work here. The style and etiquette of classic fencing saws is coded towards officers as opposed to enlisted men. It's very much upper class and genteel. Have a look at the fourth illustration to get a flavor of this. This is probably from around 1800. These people are not grunts. A lot of this vibe carried through the 19th century and into the early 20th, when fencing was enshrined as an Olympic sport. To be clear, nowadays FIE is open to everyone, and there are a lot of fencers from non-elite backgrounds, but during the 19th century, we do see a class divide opening up between officers who keep trying to evangelize what they see as proper thrust-centric fencing and broadsword users in the ranks. This culminates in around the turn of the century. I already mentioned Hutton's defense against an uncivilized enemy. Patton goes the other way. George Patton, of all people, introduced the model 1913 cavalry sword, a so-called saber, which is perfectly straight. After the 1912 Olympics, Patton had studied with the most prestigious swordsmen in France, where there was a strong tradition of thrust-centric fencing going back to the Napoleonic Wars. At the same time, we know that people of lower social classes, enlisted men as opposed to officers, let's say, were maintaining their own martial and athletic tradition. You go to the illustrations on page 5. Of course, there's pugilism. The picture on the left is 1811, but this stuff was going on for a long time before and after that. The illustration on the right is of a fictional character named George Rouncewell. He's from Dickens's novel Bleak House. He's one of the few unambiguously good characters in the whole book. And he's a military veteran. And if you do the math, it's obvious that he saw combat in the Napoleonic Wars. He runs a martial arts school in London. There's no other way to describe it. Dickens describes him as having great posture and prominent muscles visible through his shirt, the result of working out with dumbbells and broadsword. Anyway, the class element of this is a potentially huge digression. The point is just to emphasize that when you hear people deprecate cut-centric, broadswordy techniques in favor of the supposedly more precise and advanced thrust-based fencing, you do have to take it with a grain of salt. It simply isn't the case that broadswords are slow, heavy, and hard to use if you organize your body in the right way, but it's totally understandable why people would have that misconception if they're merely trying to transfer habits from longsword or small sword or indeed modern saber into how they wield a broadsword. If we're going to keep the traditions of the broadsword alive, we need to learn how to use the weapon properly and stop thinking of its weight as some kind of regrettable drawback. So it's always good to start with hard data, and so I've got some results from a database I pulled together covering sword weight. There's about 120 swords in the database. I tried to pick real historical swords from museums or high-quality modern replicas. But I've also included some of the modern simulators, such as faders that HEMA people actually fence with. So I've got them in 3 groups. Green is thrust-centric swords like small swords and rapiers. Blue is broadswords, and red is long swords. A quick way to sum up the data is in these histograms. If you don't know histograms, it just basically all it means is that the taller the bar, the more likely we are to see swords of that weight. So for thrust-centric weapons, we see 3 peaks. The little one off to the left is Olympic fencing foils. Then there's a cluster centered on around 400 grams, which is small swords. 382 grams right here. Then another group centered on about 1,000 grams, which is rapiers. This includes some older historical rapiers, which could be surprisingly heavy, and some modern ones used in HEMA. We've got some samples here. They're all, between 1,000 and 1,100 grams, basically. So broadswords have got a wide peak between about 900 and 1,300 grams. The Patton 1913 saber weighs 1,100. Beyond that, the distribution drops off rapidly, with only a few rarities getting all the way up into the 1,500 gram range. Long swords have a sharper peak around 1,400 grams. This reflects the fact that there are a bunch of faders in the database, and these seem to have standardized around that weight. Some representative samples on the left. So when we show all of these histograms together on a common weight scale, we can see that all of the distributions overlap somewhat. But broadswords are generally heavier than rapiers. Some broadswords are as heavy as some longswords. This is a historical 300-year-old English backsword that weighs almost 1,400 grams, which is the same weight as some of the longsword faders we've got down there. So some broadswords are as heavy as some longswords. Typically, though, longswords are something like 20% heavier than broadswords. And to me, this has always seemed like a really interesting fact, because it seems like a very small difference in weight, given that long swords are two-handed weapons and broadswords are one-handed. So turning now to our fictional scenario where you have 24 hours to prepare for a broadsword duel, but you've never picked up a broadsword before, what's the experience that you're going to have when you pick up a broadsword for the first time and start moving it around? It depends on what you're used to. And so I'm going to cover first the longsworder's experience and then that of the rapierist. So let me grab a fader here. So let's say that you're facing off in this general position, which I'm going to call the tournament position, because it's what all fighters in tournaments do, in spite of very clear instructions to the contrary in Fiore, Lichtenauer, Silver, and other historical sources. And that's a deep rabbit hole and digression unto itself, but here's a brief statement on that. The old masters are telling you how to murder people. They're really good at developing power. If you use those kinds of methods full force in a tournament, you're going to be black-carded and escorted to the exit by appalled referees. In a tournament, you're merely trying to make touches and score some points without hurting your friends. So this tournament stance must be good for that, because it's what people do. So from this stance, how are you going to make a cut at the opponent's head or upper body? Well, in order to accelerate the tip of the sword downward, you need to exert torque by pushing down on one part of the handle and pulling up on the other. The torque, the rotating force, is equal to the amount of force you're exerting multiplied by the lever arm, which is the distance between the 2 points where you're grabbing it. In the case of this, the lever arm is about a foot long. That's about how far apart my hands are. The pushing is happening at this end, and the main muscle that's exerting the force is the tricep, which is one of the bigger muscles in the upper body. And it's exerting that force through a strong bone connection down through the heel of the hand. The pull is mostly being done with your bicep, which is another major muscle. And you're gripping the sword with your fingers, and most people are just going to wrap their thumb over the 2 first fingers to get even a stronger grip. So with this combination of push and pull, using these big muscles and strong connections with your hands far apart, you can exert a lot of torque on the sword and move it really rapidly. So it also makes up for the inherent weakness of the tournament position. So, Fiore would rather have you wound up like this, or in Fenestra, so that you can unwind a huge blow, recruiting all of your muscles. But you don't need that much power in sparring. So what if you try the same thing with a broadsword? Well, now you're basically pushing down with your thumb and pulling up with your pinky. So the lever arm, the distance between those 2 points is just a few inches. So it's right away you're eating a factor of 4 or 3 reduction in torque, simply because the lever arm is smaller. The relevant muscle in your thumb is this thing here, which is about the size of a tablespoon. And the muscle that enables your wrist to do this is in your forearm up here, and it's obviously a much smaller muscle than the bicep or the tricep. So maybe having a lighter sword with less inertia would make up for this small amount of torque. And that actually does work with a lightweight dueling saber or an Olympic saber. Some of these even have a little pad at the top where you're supposed to put your thumb. That way of holding a sword is referred to as a saber grip for that reason. But recently I bought this 17th century English backsword from Matt Easton. And this weighs 1,400 grams, so as much as a longsword. And the design of the handle and basket is such that it's physically impossible to put your thumb on the top of the handle. They just didn't care about being able to use the saber grip. It seemed to be obvious to them that if you're engaging this tablespoon-sized muscle to move 1,400 grams of sword, you're doing something terribly wrong. So in conclusion, the speed with which you can snap a simple, obvious downward cut from the tournament stance is miserable with a real broadsword compared to what you can do with a longsword. The tournament stance is simply not your friend. Now, what if you're a rapier or a small sword fencer? What's the experience you're going to have when you pick up a broadsword and try to use it to fence? Well, obviously, we're now talking about a completely different style. It's thrust-centric. You need to keep your point on line because stabbing is the name of the game. Typically, you're going to extend the blade out in front of you and establish blade-to-blade contact. The pressure exerted on your blade by the opponent's blade is going to give you information that you can use to fence with them by making small, subtle moves. When you think you sense an opening, you execute a lunge. That's how you hurt people, by stabbing the opponent. Having a heavier blade doesn't help you hurt them any more effectively, and the weight of the blade poses a very obvious disadvantage in that the tiny, subtle movements that are second nature to rapier and small sword fencers become slower, clumsier, and more tiring as the blade gets heavier. Merely holding the blade out in front of you for any length of time, if it's one of these, becomes tiring. That's why rapiers started getting lighter as soon as they were invented, and then disappeared and were replaced by small swords that weigh about half as much as rapiers, or 1/3 the weight of broadswords, which is sad because rapier systems are fascinating. So why don't we accept the sad reality that the broadsword is a clunky, unwieldy, terrible sword? Well, it's because broadsworders don't use it like a long sword or like a small sword. We work from different stances that are described in sources such as George Silver and Thomas Page. We use different biomechanics to move the sword around. Combined with the physics inherent in the weapon, these solve the problems I've been describing. And once you know all of this, the broadsword no longer feels heavy and slow. So before we get to moving around, I'm going to do one more little digression about physics. Yeah. Thanks, that's probably enough. Bodies naturally rotate around their center of mass. A sword's center of mass is just the balance point, which is typically a few inches ahead of the guard. Everyone understands this intuitively, and many sword fighters use it all the time. I'm just kind of surfacing it. If you look at this, you understand intuitively that if I push down on the pommel, the tip is going to rotate up and vice versa. The tip naturally wants to move. I move the handle left, tip moves right. I move the handle right, tip moves left. And everyone intuitively knows this. None of this applies if you're holding the sword in a rigid death grip, because if you do that, you're fighting the physics of the blade the whole way. With a lighter sword, you can actually win that fight, but the heavier the sword gets, the more strain you're putting on your wrist and the less effective you'll be. If you hold it loosely, except at the moment of impact when you do need to tighten your grip, then the sword will spin around its center of mass in a way that you can learn how to use. The sword is at the end of a kinetic chain that starts with your feet on the ground. You can't muscle the sword with your wrist, but if you organize the rest of your body in the right way, you can achieve all the power you need. So, yeah, you want to? Yeah, thanks. So now we're going to do a little prep with Indian clubs, which are over there, and we've got more of them. So the small ones are 5 pounds, the larger ones are 10, and you only need one. You only need one. This is going to be a one-handed exercise. Okay, got our hugging out of the way. People have clubs. We do have a good number to go around. Okay. These are called Indian clubs because Brits went to India and saw people working out with them and immediately understood that this style of exercise was rooted in old martial traditions, and that if they did the same exercises, it would help them with their military training, basically. So there's a whole bunch of kinds of exercises that you can do with these things, some with lighter clubs, some with heavier. This is more of a heavy club exercise, but just to kind of convey the idea, we're going to work with 5 to 10 pounders, depending on what you've got. So the thing we're going to do is called the bull. Oh, geez. I had a COVID vaccine yesterday. Yeah. Okay. This is going to be a right-handed day for me. So we're going to do a thing called the bullwhip, and there will be some spreading out that may be advisable if you want to do this, because it does occupy some space. Yeah, we're going to have to not be in the circle configuration, but in more of a grid configuration. So when you're using these, just basic safety stuff, basically don't shrug your shoulders. If you try to raise your shoulders, what you're doing is turning on your upper traps. So you're suspending the weight of the club from your neck, okay? And your neck will eventually feel it. If you're older, that will surface sooner. So keep your shoulders down and back. The classic Victorian He-Man posture is actually a legit, yeah, shoulders back, sternum up, chin tucked. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to start with just get a feel for the swing along the side of the body here. Just get yourself situated in such a way that you're not going to smash your knee or your ankle. It's kind of hard to break this one down, so I'm just going to kind of show the whole thing. But what's going to happen is that as I bring it forward, I'm going to swing it around to the other side of my body and around my back till it's hanging behind me, and then I'm going to whip it forward. So that looks like. There's a moment in this. Yeah, we should probably pull that up. There's a moment in this when it's hanging behind your, if you're doing it with your right hand, it's behind your right shoulder blade. Okay, and then from there, you need to launch it forward, so it's pointing straight out, almost as if you're thrusting it at somebody standing in front of you, and that is a big. That's a big movement that recruits your lats and recruits your core. I usually do a big grunt when I'm when I'm launching it forward. Maybe I will try with my left hand. So this is a 14 pounder. And you can start adding in some more deep knee bend action. So this becomes more of a full body exercise. So as the club swings behind you, you can drop into a kind of downhill racer tuck. And then when you spring up out of that, that springing up can help drive the forward motion. Mine's longer, so I kind of have to go around the outside of my shoulder. Good question. For me, would you get a 20, sir? A 20-pound Indian club? Yeah. For me, a lot of this is about, this is just to make an example because it's a more extreme club, but a lot of this is about reducing the amount of effort that I have to put into the process. So the thing I already mentioned, using your legs to drive the swing forward, that's really easy. You're just standing up. And then when you're swinging it around your left side, you're just basically letting it dangle. You're just letting gravity. You're not trying to force it up into a, and this becomes obvious. So a lot of this broadsword stuff is tricky because if you try to use these techniques with lighter swords, you can cheat and you don't suffer. But if you use them with heavier swords, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. So there's very few points in this motion but I'm really doing a lot of work. Okay, the stand up drives it forward. It starts to, from the position out in front of me, it wants to fall back. So I just turn my wrist over, yeah, and look at my watch and give it a little guidance to move around this way. And then the getting around behind my back is just easy. I'm not even sure which muscle's being recruited there. Yeah. Yeah, you're letting it kind of do what it wants to do. And then the one moment of big exertion is the launch out of here, okay? But again, if you let your legs compress while it's coming behind you, then out of here, by straightening your legs, you can kind of give this thing a launch that enables you to kind of snap it forward. So, and if you're interested in this, what I would suggest is try it later with some of the heavier, just work your way up to heavier clubs, because you'll kind of see that the heavier weight forces you to move in a particular way that wouldn't be possible with a lighter club. So let's put these away. We can just put them off to the side. Let's not spend a lot of time on it. So let's start with the case of you're a rapier or a small sword fencer, and you need to know what to do. And we're going to go with silver here, which is an interesting case because he hates rapier. Like he wrote a whole book about how much he hates it, which was just incoherent sputtering. And then he had to follow up with another book where he actually gave some more useful information. So he does not love thrusting stances, but he calls out 4 of them specifically. Because he knows that the backsword is a thrust weapon. So the 2 we're going to talk about are called stoccata and passata. The only difference between them is which foot is forward. So in both of these stances, you're basically holding the sword with the hilt down at your hip. If your right foot is, or your dominant foot is forward, you're in stoccata. If your dominant foot is back, you're in passata. And the only way I remember it is that from passata, you would have to make a passing step to advance. But in both of these positions, you're holding the sword straight down like this. That's a more sustainable way to to hold it than out in front of you. It's got some other advantages. One is that you can get a lot of extension just by moving your arm. So if you're already holding it in a partially extended position and you want to advance the tip and try to hurt someone, then you can get, like maybe a foot of extension by straightening your arm, and you've got to get the rest of the movement by footwork, by doing a lunge, basically. Whereas from these positions, without moving your feet at all, you can get a pretty large forward extension. Another thing that's kind of omnipresent in this sort of system is the fact that that your opponent has 2 hands, and typically people are standing in more of a straight ahead stance as opposed to a classic stance like this. So the left hand can come into play, and people who are good at this are constantly looking for opportunities to reach out and slap the sword away or even grab the sword. And if they can do that, then it's going to become a very bad day for whoever just got their sword grabbed. There's a kind of related thing that Page talks about called battering. It's a very earthy term, where he's basically just saying that if someone's holding their sword out where you can get to the weak, that you should just smash it down as hard as you can and then kill them. And he says specifically, you may need to hit it 3 times. Kind of calls up a whole scene in your head of dudes in kilts executing this move. The other thing is that silver probably doesn't care about blade engagement, the blade engagement game where you're doing the fencey type stuff. And that's probably a good thing because, like I said, it's going to be harder with a heavier weapon. I'm not saying you can't do it. So your extension is going to come from this extension of the arm, possibly with a small step forward. We don't do big lunges. So to borrow a line from Nathan Barnett, who teaches our silver backsword class here, when we're doing backsword fencing, we never stand in an attitude that would look weird if you did it at the bus stop, waiting for a bus, okay? So if you're at the bus stop, you stand like this, or you stand like this, or you stand like this, fine. But if you stand like this, people are going to back away from you, right? So there's a reason for this, which is mostly the vulnerability of the knee. Now, if a person's knee is out, you can hit it with a thrust or a cut. The people who are good at stabby fighting spend hours working on the precision of their thrust and learning how to hit small targets. The knee is definitely a small target, especially when everyone's moving. And when adrenaline kicks in, it gets harder and harder to do clever, coordinated things with your muscles. There's a great book called The Beast in the Garden, which is about a mountain lion in Boulder, Colorado. That was a few years ago. That was running around taking down joggers. And there's a bit where somebody notices this mountain lion in the middle of Boulder, up in a tree, watching a frat party. And so they call the cops, and the cops show up, and they start trying to shoot the mountain lion. And these are all people who've spent hours at the range shooting holes in targets. I mean, they're good marksmen. They're not just a bunch of klutzes. But somehow, when they're staring up at the apex predator, in the heat of the moment, they cannot hit this mountain lion, and so it just basically slinks off. So it's a pretty well-established fact that doing precise things when you're adrenalized is harder. Also, if you're doing this in a thrusting kind of combat, it means that you're taking your weapon offline, you're taking your tip offline. However, the knee, the extended knee, is a very easy target for cuts. You don't even have to see it. If I just look at Thomas and oh, it looks like he's lunging, I can just blindly lash out and probably hit him with with a swipe of the sword. It requires no aiming at all. And you can come right out of that into a defensible position. You're not here, you come right out into a position that you can fight from. So broadsworders tend to be vicious knee cutters. And we've got some people here who can attest that on our Monday night sparring sessions, any knee that it projects forward gets hit. So what you're going to do if you want to stab your opponent in the duel is you're going to be in something like this, staccata, and you're going to try to get within range so that you can do your stab. Now, if that works, then game over. You've had a great day. But if your opponent's good at broadsword, they know what you're doing and they know how dangerous you are from this position. And so they're not going to let you get within range. The classic silver position is called open fight. And you can do it with the tip straight up or angled back. Nathan Barnett's a tip straight up kind of guy. Paul Wagner is a tip back kind of guy. It's just whatever you want. It feels a bit awkward. If you kind of the more you sag, the harder it gets. The more vertical you are, the more your arm is just acting as a column. So right now the tip or the basket of the sword is just on my thumb and my index finger, and the weight is just being transmitted down through my body. So I can stand here all day. Against staccata, this is doing two things. So one is it's a guard of invitation. So I'm saying, come at me, bro. Try to stab me. But it's at the same time threatening a powerful blow down to the head, which is what Silver calls a downright blow. Silver literally says, bring me to a fencer, meaning a rapier fencer. I will bring him out of his fence tricks with downright blows. I will make him forget his fence tricks. So, a little bravado there from our man, George Silver. Anyway, what that means is that if you're it's okay to take it down, but I appreciate your persistence. And we'll talk about how to do that downright blow in a few minutes. First, we're going to talk about how to defend yourself against it, right? So every fencing system has got the page where it talks about what if someone comes running at you like this and just tries to murder you, in Fiore, it's called the peasant's blow. And in Lichtenauer, it's the Zornhau. It's just the intuitive, any random idiot, tries to hit you. So we're going to talk about how to defend against that. And I'll say that in the tournament stance fight, if someone's trying to get in with a little tap, you've got a lot of options on how to defend against that attack. But if it's a committed downright blow with a 1,400-gram sword, you really have to think about structure, and you have to do it right. So if your tip is high and out in front of you, it's an easy target for the opponent to knock it aside, the battering thing I mentioned earlier. What you really want to do is block the attack by punching into the opponent's weak with your strong. And conveniently, the strong is exactly where the center of gravity of your sword is. It's right here. And if it's a basket-hilted sword, your hand is going to be really well protected by the basket. Now, with a stirrup guard, maybe not so much. But if you're starting here, what you need to do is get your right hand wherever it needs to be to punch into the attacker's weak. And along the way, you need to decide if the tip of your sword is going to be pointed up or pointed down. Both will work, but can you get something that's not foam? Okay, so so what this would look like if he's attacking me from open fight and I'm starting down here. One of my options is to go ahead, is to sort of punch up like this and get my strong up there. I did it too far out. What I would really want to do is more like this. But silver doesn't advocate that. So silver wants you to go tip down. And so having your tip down rules out battering. So if I'm here, he could change angles and just smack this out of the way and get an open line. If I'm tipped down, that's not going to happen from a high attack. The other thing is that if I'm going tip up and he decides to get tricky and cut low, I'm in a really bad way. I can't change my defense fast enough to avoid getting my leg cut off. Whereas if I'm here and he gets tricky and goes low, all I've got to do at most is lower my tip. But it's also easier to do this because you're making the physics of the blade work with you instead of against you. So remember, the tip of the sword wants to move in the opposite direction that you're moving the handle. If you're standing with your hand low and you want to punch high to get your strong up against the opponent's weak, you're moving the handle up, and your tip is naturally going to move. If you keep a loose grip and just relax, your tip is just going to rotate down. And you don't have to do anything at all with your wrist. You're not trying to muscle it around. So the Broadsword group here at Lone is coached by Nathan Barnett, and he advocates an intermediate position that he calls prep, which doesn't appear in the, you're going to need one again. Maybe you could just, thank you. It's not in silver, but it's the only thing we found to make sense. Basically, if you see an attack developing, you want to get into a position where your tip is lower than the opponent's basket, and everything's kind of in the middle. So you don't want to cheat your hand off to one side or the other because you don't know what direction the attack's coming from. And having the basket in the middle gives you some protection. So some people, I like to hold prep a little lower. Some people like to do it a little higher. But the point is that you need to have your body organized so you can chamber that powerful blow with good structure. If you're, some word about how muscles work. If your arm is almost straight, you don't have a lot of strength. You don't have a lot of range of motion left to work with. If your arm is sharply bent, you're also not very strong in that position. If your arm's or your leg or any other extremity is at about 90, then you're kind of at a good range to develop a lot of power. So if you're in your prep position with your arm, with your elbow bent and palm down, tip low, you're in a good position to you're going to punch up into the opponent's attack, and you're going to just have a completely relaxed hand. So when the blow comes in, you want to be grabbing the handle, but other than that, I'm just letting it hang off my pinky right now. I'm not controlling its angle at all. A lot of people want to extend it out from the body. It's a natural instinct. Keep the bad man far away from me. You don't need to do that. You probably shouldn't. So you want it here, basically. And if you're out here, there's a few things that can go wrong. One is that if I block that way, if I block far out, he can angle around my block and hit me in the head. Let's do it again. So I'm in prep. He comes out of open fight. I reach way out, and he just whips around me and hits me in the head. Another drawback of it is that if I reach out like that, let's do it again. I'm meeting his blade in the middle. Don't do the head hit thing, but we'll just do a straight, like, downright blow. So here I'm kind of meeting his blade somewhere in the middle, whereas I really want to meet it on the weak, way out at the end. You're structurally weaker because you're cantilevered out, and you don't have power available for a follow-up attack because your arm is straight. So having your arm bent sets you up to deliver a really powerful counter out of this position is called guardant. But one of the nice things about guardant is that you can hit out from it. So since I've been talking a lot, and this is going to be a little tricky with so many people, but it's nice to hit things. And it's worth experimenting and seeing what kind of hitting dynamics you can achieve out of the classic guardant position. And I'll go slowly, but the obvious one is just a horizontal backhand blow against the opponent's head. You can also go over the top very easily. Or you can even sort of swing it around behind your back and attack from the other side. So, so that's kind of that's the version of this for people who are used to thrusting styles. And it basically, boils down to don't be too extended and be ready. You know that the silver guy is going to try to hit you in the head with his downright blow. So just be ready to execute this block. There's other blocks that we can talk about if we've got time later, but that's kind of the 101 version of how to defend yourself against the downright blow. How about if you're a long sworder and you're coming into this dual situation? If you're a long sworder, you're probably cut oriented. Your brain, your visual system are tuned to look for ways to deliver cuts, also to recognize when cuts are coming in at you and get your blade crosswise to the attack to block it. So that's all good stuff as far as it goes, but you don't have the two-handed leverage working for you anymore, so you need to recruit different parts of your body and use blade physics. So we're going to talk.
Speak up a bit, we can also probably.
Oh, really? Is it getting loud? Okay. Okay, yeah. Hi. So we're just doing the long sorter's perspective now, and what we talked about just now was a defense going into garden, which sets you up for a very powerful offensive strike. So I hope you all got a chance to hit something and kind of get some intuition for that you can hit hard out of garden. How do you do the downright blow if you're on offense? You know, and you want to bring down that downright blow. What's the right way to do that? And this starts to get a little arcane, but I'm going to try to cover it. If you are, yeah, thanks. Yeah, if you're in this, and you want to end up hitting the opponent on, basically you're going to aim for the head. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and the wrong way is to sort of bring your whole arm and sword down like the hand of a clock, because during this part of the attack, your arm is vulnerable, and somebody who knows what they're doing will attack the arm. It's embarrassing as well as possibly ending your life. So so what we do instead is we begin by getting the basket in front of our sternum. This isn't, who's got a legit basket? Yeah, that'll work. Okay. So if you get that in front of your sternum and just keep aiming it at me, just arm out, need a little more space. If I'm trying to hit your arm, I can come in. Yeah, it is a buckler. I can come in from any direction. I cannot hit your arm. If I move sideways, I might be able to hit it, but all you have to do is that. Yeah. So, thank you. So anyway, so this is a happy place if you've got a basket, and you want to get from open fight to your happy place as fast as you can, okay? And then from there, you're free to make various kinds of attacks from different angles. The most obvious classic one would be just you, sir, just step forward. Thanks, Mr. White. The classic one is just to the upper left part of the head. So thanks. And then we get into a problem. Do you want to grab a sword? So if I do that, and Mr. White follows the instructions just mentioned and goes into garden and blocks me. So here I am. I've just been blocked. Now, you guys know what happens next because you just were doing it. He is chambered. I'm extended. I got nothing. My sword is stopped. And he is in a position to just push that thing out of the way and just absolutely murder me. If I skitter, if I'm not in the way, so I come down, I bounce off or follow through or something, then I'm dead. I mean, he's just going to launch an extremely powerful attack out of garden and just kill me. So sometimes when we're drilling this at a basic level, So let's both be open, and I'll do downright blow, and you go prep and garden, okay, and block my blow. So here I come. He blocks me, and then thanks. And then sometimes the drill stops there. That's a really bad place to stop the drill because of what he's going to do to me next. So what we learn is that we're going to do the same thing. Okay, I come in. I need to be getting away at the same moment as my blow is landing. Because if I don't, he's just going to freaking kill me. So, so how do we organize our body to make all these things happen? I've been watching people better than me do this for a bunch of years, and I think I know what they're doing. So I'm gonna surface, yeah, some of their. Yeah, I know, right? So what I notice is that when, say, Mr. Barnett, Nathan Barnett, you don't need to do anything right now. When he does this part of it and gets his basket out in front of his sternum, his sword, which started vertical, angles back. So at this point, his tip is angled back at about a 45-degree angle. Now, why is it doing that? Because of blade physics. Because he's pushing the handle forward, the tip, because he's so relaxed, infuriatingly relaxed and easygoing, the tip is just going to go back. And then, but wait a second, if he's kind of stopped here, how does he then, out of that, manage to deliver a strong blow? Well, yeah, I think he does it by withdrawing. Because by pulling the blade back, the handle back, if your grip is relaxed, you're converting some of your momentum into a strong downward blow. So let's see if we can find a way to play with this. It is more of a pair type of drill. So if you can try to pair up with somebody who's got a similar, foam is fine and it's not great, but it's like I said, this stuff all becomes easier and more obvious with a heavy sword because it's all heavy sword mechanics. And so if you're using a light sword, you kind of have to use your imagination. And if you got a heavier one, it's just, oh, this is obvious. But what we want to do is, pair up with somebody who's got a similar-ish weapon, like foam versus foam, steel versus steel, basically. And then we're going to work through some stages of how to learn this, the downright blow, and how to recruit blade physics. Okay, so I find myself individually giving the same advice to everyone, so I didn't do a great job of communicating this the first time around. You want to grab a sword? Yeah, that's better. So you be the attacker. If I try to get into Gardent by doing that, so it might work. So you come in, you're doing the blow. I'm kind of circling my blade around and trying to get it down. I'm trying to get my strong under his blade and into position before I get hit in the head. Okay, that's great if you can do it, but you're probably running a race that you can't win. You don't want your tip to be to the outside of the opponent's attack, and that's kind of where prep comes in. I kind of skipped over this in my description, so my bad. But essentially, if we're at open fight and I see him chambering an attack, the first thing I do is drop into this prep position, which has the tip. Basically, if you watch the tip of my sword, it's just going vertically down. Okay, it's not swinging around like this. It's just dropping. Okay, so if I just drop it, then I'm in a position that when he comes in, I can do my punch, and I don't have to worry about him coming in underneath me and hitting me. Um, so, so try it that way. Are there any other questions that are coming up? It's a big group. So, yeah.
I think we had some difficulty with the concept of, so when you're attacking from here, that all seems totally reasonable.
Yep.
And then delivering that cut with a move back.
Yep.
It feels like the time it takes for your sword to do that is too short for your feet to keep up, kind of.
Could be. Yeah. Time of the hand, time of the foot. That's a big silver obsession. I mean, there's other ways to draw your hand back besides footwork. Okay. So if you're extended here, this is something you can actually work against a stationary target. You can put a little bend into your elbow, and you can draw your shoulder back some, Thomas.
I was going to ask if is this an okay cue? When I do this, I end up thinking about it like I'm throwing an L-shaped jab.
Yeah.
So I'm coming down here and then I'm just throwing a jab.
Yeah, there are many cues. There are many cues that we employ to try to. One is the J stroke. One is the swoop. It's the same idea. If you like to think in terms of boxing, then for sure it's like a little jab from the right shoulder. Yeah, and another one that we do is we'll hold out a focus mitt or focus pad, and just have the attacker just do a pommel strike into the pad. So that's something we could almost try. But does somebody want to round up some focus pads? Just the focus mitts that. So we'll get a little sideshow going on that topic. But yeah, whatever makes you do the right thing is a good cue, and everyone responds to different cues. Yeah. So. The other thing that you're kind of getting with this is that you're sort of ending up in prep. So you're ending up, instead of stopping here, you're kind of ending up in a position from which you can defend yourself. Let me demo it. So a drill we do, if you put that at about a 45, is simply to just practice driving, doing a pommel strike onto a target. And it's artificial. It's just not actually what we're doing. But if you pattern that into your brain, you get the idea that this needs to be a really strong, decisive movement.
I noticed while we were drilling that my point at the end of this wanted to come down on the draw. Is there a biomechanical thing I can do to encourage my point to stay engaged?
It's a big topic with heavy one-handed swords. So
I noticed like turning that. Well, you just mentioned like turning a little bit.
Yeah. It does. Yeah.
As opposed to like trying to keep it straight out.
Yeah. Well, this actually sets up another topic I was going to discuss, which maybe this is a good time to do it. Guardant is good for defending your upper left quadrant. If they go low, you go to bastard guardant, which just means low guardant. If they go to your right side low, you pivot. You need to pivot on the balls of your feet a little bit. Classic. And you can guard kind of the lower right side of your body. But the one thing that is you can't really do as a tip down defense is guard your upper right. You can do this, which looks really cool and gets you style points. And it also, if you're moving to your left, it also sets you up to come around and attack do a counter. So that's awesome. But if you're lying spent, so the problem you're describing is called lying spent. Yeah. So let's say you need to get up here. If you need to go into guard, you can do the punch thing we've already done. But what if you need to mount a defense to your upper right quadrant? There's a thing you can do where the sort of more intuitive approach uses the true edge. So your palm is facing the opponent, okay? So you're kind of raising the sword like this. But the cool way to do it is to do it palm towards you with the false edge. And the way it works is that you come up and you snap your elbow into your ribs with your palm toward you. It takes a little practice to get the timing down. But we're again using this blade physics where if you're punching I'm going to stand with my back to you. If you're punching your fist to your left, it means that the most of the blade is going to snap to the right, which is where the threat's coming from. And so we've been trying to
just realize that how much of this relies on your grip being loose. Like a death grip is not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So this, but the key to it is this jamming your elbow into your ribs at the end, so that your fist moves to the left. And it makes you look like the coolest badass on the planet if you can pull it off. So there's that. This is also pretty cool. You can pull that off. Yeah, so that's, we actually do a similar exercise with the Indian clubs. Yeah. So anyway, we got 15 minutes left. That's sort of all the stuff I wanted to cover, and we've talked about a few things here in this little talking session. One of them is this idea that if you're going into Guardant, you don't want to do this race around the outside. You want to drop straight down the middle and punch up. So you can work on that with your partner. And then another one is this. How do you get cutting power by recruiting your body? And then the third one is this idea of the cool block. The other one, is this idea that you can punch. So we've got some focus mitts. If people want to play with that. That's maybe better with the foam swords, but I would suggest pair up, work on whatever you think is interesting, and I'll try to circulate and answer questions if there's questions. Okay, we got 3.5 minutes left. Basic points. Back swords lasted for a long time. People seem to like them. People who fought in wars. The weight is feels strange if you're not used to them. If you're used to a different weapon. People who were good at using these things had stances and techniques that I think adapted to the weight of the weapon and to the physics of the weapon and the biomechanics of how to use them. And I think there's sort of evidence of I wouldn't call it an underground, but let's call it people learning from each other in less formal settings than a fencing assault. The British soldiers in India watching people, Punjabis, doing Indian club workout to say, okay, I get what he's doing. I'm going to take that home and use it. And so I would encourage people to play with this stuff, but paradoxically, the way to get good at it is to do it with heavy swords, because that instinctively shows you the way, whereas you can cheat. You can even use a fader to do a lot of this stuff. It's not that different in terms of weight and blade length from a back sword. So be a little careful not to stab yourself in the face with the crossbow, But because of the weight, because of the length, it's not a bad training tool to use to develop some of this know-how. It's about loose grip. It's about recruiting your whole body and learning the physics of the sword, how it wants to move, and recruiting that and using it instead of trying to fight it. So, any last questions or comments or anything before we wrap it up?
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.